Welcome back to the Midnight Hunt. Tonight we have a story you definitely don't want to watch alone. This is the tale of the Faceless Man. Do you have the courage to stick around until the end? Let's see if you can handle the whole story. The air was thick with the weight of impending rain, and the moon was a pale, distant blur behind heavy clouds. Mike, Jessica, Chris, and Laura stood outside the crumbling remains of St. Mary's Hospital, a place long abandoned and forgotten by most. The locals called it cursed. There were stories of people going missing inside its decaying walls, of strange figures seen peering out from the shattered windows late at night, long after the building had been closed. It was a place for the reckless and the foolish to test their courage, and tonight, the four of them would do exactly that. "I'm not sure this is a good idea," Jessica muttered, pulling her jacket tighter against the cold. Her eyes darted to the hospital's broken windows, as if expecting something to peer back at her. The stories about St. Mary's had been enough to keep her awake the night before, but she hadn't wanted to seem like the coward of the group. "Come on," Mike said with a reassuring grin, sliding an arm around her shoulders. "It's just an old building. We'll take a look around, grab a few pictures for the gram, and be out in an hour. What's the worst that could happen?" Chris rolled his eyes. "This place is probably full of rats and mold. Let's just get in and out." Laura stayed silent, chewing her bottom lip as she glanced up at the towering, broken structure. She wasn't afraid of rats or dirt. What bothered her was the oppressive, eerie stillness of the place, as if the air itself was waiting for something. They pushed through the rusted doors, the sound of creaking metal echoing through the empty halls. Inside, the hospital smelled of rot and mold, the scent thick in the back of their throats. The floors groaned under their weight as they stepped cautiously, the beams of their flashlights bouncing off the peeling walls and broken equipment. "This place is seriously messed up," Chris muttered, shining his light on a collapsed gurney, its wheels rusted and bent. "Why did we think this was a good idea again?" "Because it's cool as hell," Mike said with a grin, pulling out his phone to snap a picture. The flash illuminated the decaying hallway, casting long, grotesque shadows that made Jessica's stomach tighten. She forced herself to look away. The group moved deeper into the hospital, passing through rooms that had long since been forgotten. There were old waiting areas with toppled chairs, shattered glass cabinets in what used to be examination rooms, and piles of paperwork strewn across the floor. But it wasn't just the decay that unnerved Jessica. There was a feeling that clung to the walls, something she couldn't quite name. It felt alive, as if the building itself was watching them, waiting for them to step too far. "We've seen enough," she whispered, stopping in the middle of a long hallway. Her voice trembled despite her efforts to sound calm. "Let's go back." Mike turned to her, about to argue, but Chris stepped in. "I agree. This place is bad news, man. Let's get out of here before we run into squatters, or worse." "Worse?" Mike raised an eyebrow. "You know, the locals talk about this place like it's cursed." Laura spoke up for the first time in a while, her voice low and wary. "People disappearing, weird figures seen in the windows. They call it the Faceless Man. Some kind of spirit or whatever." Mike scoffed. "Come on, you're buying into that crap?" "We don't need to stick around to find out," Chris said, already heading back toward the exit. "Let's just get out of here." But before they could take another step, there was a sound, a loud, metallic clang from somewhere deeper in the hospital. They froze. "What the hell was that?" Laura whispered, her voice barely audible. "Probably just the wind," Mike said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Jessica's heart raced, her eyes scanning the dark corridors. The sound of the clang echoed again, closer this time, like something, or someone, was moving through the hospital's old, forgotten halls. There was a scraping sound now, like footsteps dragging across the floor. "It's coming from down there," Chris said, his flashlight pointing down a side corridor. But his hand was shaking, and the beam of light wavered against the wall. "Maybe it's squatters," Jessica whispered, her stomach knotting with dread. "We should go." The scraping sound grew louder, accompanied by a low, raspy breath. Something was moving, coming toward them. Then they saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, lanky, wearing what looked like a filthy hospital gown. But it wasn't the tattered clothing that made the group's blood run cold. It was his face, or rather, the absence of one. The man had no face, just a smooth expanse of skin where his eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. It was grotesque, unnatural, as though the features had been erased entirely, leaving only a hollow shell of a human being. The faceless man stood in the hallway, his head cocked to the side, as if listening to them. And then he moved, silent but fast. "Run!" Mike screamed, grabbing Jessica's arm and dragging her down the hall. The group bolted, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors as they fled blindly through the hospital. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the faceless man's silent pursuit sent chills down their spines. Jessica could barely breathe, her heart hammering in her chest as they stumbled through the winding hallways, trying to find their way back to the entrance. But the hospital was a labyrinth of darkness. The corridors seemed to twist and turn in impossible directions, and soon they realized they had lost their way. "Where's the exit?" Laura gasped, her eyes wild with fear. "I don't know," Mike shouted, looking frantically around. A terrible wet thud sounded from behind them. Chris screamed, and when they turned, he was gone. "Chris!" Laura screamed, but her voice was cut short as something unseen dragged her into the darkness. Her screams echoed through the halls, growing fainter until there was nothing but silence. Jessica's knees buckled, her mind reeling with terror. "Mike, we have to go back for them. They're gone!" Mike's voice cracked, his face pale with shock. "We have to get out of here before it gets us too." But Jessica couldn't move. She couldn't leave them behind. The weight of guilt and terror crushed her chest, but she felt the overwhelming presence in the air. The faceless man was close. Too close. Mike grabbed her wrist, pulling her to her feet. "Come on!" They stumbled through the halls, gasping for breath, until they burst through the front doors into the night. The cold air hit them like a slap, and for a moment they stood there, trembling and panting, trying to process the horror they had just escaped. But the hospital wasn't done with them. From deep within its shadowed halls, a low, guttural sound echoed out, a promise of what was still waiting inside. Mike and Jessica didn't wait to see if the faceless man would follow. They ran, down the hill, across the overgrown lot, until the hospital was just a dark silhouette against the sky. But as they reached the safety of the car, Jessica turned back, her breath caught in her throat. Through one of the broken windows, she saw him. The faceless man stood there, watching, his head cocked to one side. He wasn't finished. And somehow, Jessica knew he would find them again, no matter where they ran. And that was the faceless man. If you made it all the way through, congratulations, you're braver than most, but don't get too comfortable. There are plenty more terrifying tales lurking in the shadows. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you dare to join us again for the next midnight hunt. Until then, sleep with one eye open. You never know who or what might be watching.